The Harrington farmhouse always smelled of oak and smoke, the scent of a man who had built every corner with his own two hands. Samuel Harrington had lived there for 50 years, raising a son, burying a wife, and working the land until his back bent and his hands carried the map of a life carved in calluses. Now, at 72, Samuel thought the house would be his refuge, the hearth where family bonds burned warmest. Instead, it had become a stage for betrayal. The night it began was supposed to be a celebration. The long oak table gleamed under candlelight, plates heavy with roast lamb, potatoes, and wine. Relatives had come, cousins, uncles, neighbors, even old friends. Samuel sat at the head of the table, quiet pride in his chest as laughter bounced off the walls he had built long ago. But it ended with a sentence that cut deeper than any blade. "You're not family," his grandson Ethan said, his voice sharp and deliberate, carrying across the table like a challenge. The words hung in the air, thick as smoke. Glasses clinked awkwardly, forks scraped nervously against plates, but no one spoke in Samuel's defense. They looked away, his son David carving meat as if nothing happened, Clara smirking at her wine glass, neighbors coughing politely, pretending the moment was nothing. Samuel's chest burned. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He sat still, every muscle taut, the echo of those words louder than the chatter that carried on. "You're not family." The boy he once carried on his shoulders, the boy who had begged for bedtime stories, had erased him with a single sentence. And no one stopped him. Samuel excused himself after an hour, muttering about needing air. No one followed. The hallway was dim, lined with photographs. Samuel's steps slowed as he noticed the frames. Once, these walls told his story. A wedding portrait with his late wife Margaret, a younger David, grinning with missing teeth, Ethan perched proudly on Samuel's lap. But the newer photos had replaced them. David and Clara at galas, Ethan in his football jersey, Lily mid-laugh in a summer field. But Samuel's face was gone. He had already been erased long before Ethan's words. He paused by the living room, where laughter and clinking glasses echoed. Clara's voice rose above the rest. "Well, things are finally better now. We can host properly." David chuckled in agreement. "Yes, it feels lighter, lighter, better. Without him." Samuel's chest ached as he lowered himself into his old leather chair by the window, the one where he used to hold David as a boy, reading him fairy tales until sleep carried him away. The same chair where Ethan once sat giggling, begging for just one more story. And now that same boy had declared him an outsider. "Grandpa?" Samuel turned. Standing in the doorway was Lily, her hands clasped nervously, her eyes soft and shining with sorrow. At 15, she still saw him with unclouded eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "about what Ethan said. It isn't true." Samuel forced a smile, though his chest trembled. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. You are family," Lily said firmly. "You're everything. They don't see it, but I do." Samuel's throat tightened. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Sometimes people forget where they come from. They forget who held them when they stumbled. But forgetting doesn't change the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. "I hate how they treat you." "Hate is heavy," Samuel said gently, pressing her hands. "Let me carry it. You just remember." Lily nodded, wiping her cheeks quickly before slipping back toward the dining room. She was young, but her loyalty was a balm. Samuel hadn't expected that night. He sat long after the plates were cleared, the laughter faded, and the house grew quiet. Alone, staring at the oak table he had built with his hands, He whispered to the wood itself, "Not yet, but soon." And so it began. Samuel Harrington, erased, humiliated, betrayed, would remind them who had built the foundation they stood on, not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth carved deeper than blood. Because sometimes the loudest revenge does not come in storms. It comes in silence, in patience, in a man everyone thought was finished, but wasn't. Morning broke over Ashwood Valley with a bitter chill. Frost clung to the farmhouse windows, and the fields outside lay bare, stripped of harvest. Samuel rose early, as he always did, moving with the discipline of decades, though his joints protested. He brewed black coffee in the old percolator, the same one Margaret had used years ago. The smell filled the kitchen, mingling with memories of laughter and warmth that no longer lived here. By the time the sun's pale light spilled across the floorboards, the house had already begun to stir. Clara's heels clicked against the hallway tiles, sharp and impatient. David trailed after her, voice muffled as he argued about expenses and accounts. Samuel stayed quiet at the table, sipping his coffee. Clara entered first. Lips painted a perfect shade of crimson, her smile brittle. "Good morning, Father," she said, her tone laced with mock sweetness. "I trust you slept well?" Samuel didn't answer immediately. He studied her, the gleam in her eyes that always seemed to mask something sharp, something calculating. "Well enough," he replied finally. David joined, adjusting his tie as though he were preparing for a courtroom rather than breakfast at his father's house. "We've been talking," he said, sitting down across from Samuel. "This house is a lot to manage. You're not as young as you used to be. Maybe it's time you let us take some responsibility." Samuel raised a brow. "And by responsibility, you mean ownership?" Clara's smile thinned. "That's not what he said." "No," Samuel said evenly, "but it's what he meant." The tension cracked as Ethan sauntered in, his phone glued to his hand, laughter spilling from his lips. "Morning," he mumbled, not bothering to look up. Samuel watched his grandson drop into a chair, feet propped carelessly on another. The boy's arrogance stung not because Samuel hadn't seen teenage pride before, but because Ethan had inherited Clara's disdain. "Put your feet down," Samuel said quietly. Ethan smirked. "Why? It's just a chair." Samuel leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "It's not just a chair. It's part of this home, the home I built. Show it some respect." Ethan scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You and your stories about building things. Nobody cares about that anymore." "Times change, Grandpa." Samuel's chest tightened, but before he could answer, Lily entered. She slipped into the room quietly, carrying a stack of books. Unlike her brother, she glanced at Samuel with soft eyes and offered a small smile. "Good morning, Grandpa." The words steadied him. Breakfast passed with muted conversation. Clara dominated the table, speaking of her plans for renovations, her tone dripping with subtle mockery. "This kitchen is so outdated," she remarked, tracing a finger along the countertop Samuel had sanded by hand decades ago. "Imagine marble here, stainless steel there, modern, stylish. It would finally look like a proper home." Samuel's hand curled around his coffee mug. "It already is a proper home." "To you," Clara countered smoothly. "But the world has moved on. It's embarrassing to host people in a place that looks, well, so old." Lily's voice cut through, surprising everyone. "It's not embarrassing. It's history. Grandpa made it with his own hands. That makes it more beautiful than anything marble could." The table fell silent. Clara's jaw tightened, but she forced a laugh. How quaint. David placed a hand on her arm, urging calm, but his eyes cold, calculating, told Samuel everything. They weren't just trying to change the house, they wanted to erase him. Later that afternoon, Samuel retreated to his workshop at the edge of the property. Dust hung in the air, the smell of sawdust and oil thick and comforting. This was his sanctuary, the place where the world's noise couldn't reach. He traced the handle of an old hammer, one he'd used when building the farmhouse. Each tool carried memory, proof of years no one could steal from him. Yet even here, the weight of betrayal pressed heavy. As he worked, Lily appeared in the doorway, her breath puffing in the cold air. "Grandpa?" He looked up, softening at the sight of her. "Shouldn't you be inside, warm?" She shook her head. "I like it here. It feels real." Samuel smiled faintly. "Real is rare in this house these days." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I heard Mom and Dad talking. They want you to sign papers. Something about the deed." Samuel's eyes darkened. "Did they say when?" "Soon," she whispered. "They think if they push you enough, you'll give in." He set his hammer down slowly. "Let them try. I didn't build this home to hand it to greed." Lily's eyes shimmered with tears. "I don't want them to win, Grandpa. I don't want them to hurt you." He placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I've fought harder battles than this, but I'll need you to be strong, stronger than they expect." She nodded, determination shining through her fear. That night, Samuel stood once more in the dining room, staring at the long oak table. Its grain still bore the marks of his tools, the memory of every meal, every fight, every reconciliation it had witnessed. It had now seen betrayal too. His reflection in the window stared back at him, older, wearier, but unbroken. They wanted to erase him, but he wasn't gone. Not yet. And when the time came, they would remember who Samuel Harrington really was. Not with marble counters, not with laughter at his expense, but with the truth carved into every board, every brick, every paper they thought forgotten. The air in Ashwood Valley grew colder as autumn deepened, the leaves turning brittle shades of gold and crimson. Inside the Harrington farmhouse, however, the chill didn't come from the wind. It came from voices that grew sharper with each passing day. Samuel felt it most in the mornings. The kitchen, once filled with Margaret's humming and the smell of fresh bread, was now dominated by Clara's clipped tones. "David," she said one morning, her fork clinking against her plate, "we can't keep waiting. The longer your father delays, the harder it will be to secure things properly. We need that deed signed before the end of the year." Samuel, sitting at the head of the table, didn't flinch. He stirred his oatmeal calmly, as if her words hadn't reached him. But his hands tightened on the spoon, the steel trembling slightly under his grip. David sighed, his voice carrying a rehearsed calm. "Father, Clara's right. The property taxes, the upkeep, it's too much for you. You should let us manage everything. You'll still live here, of course, but with less responsibility." Samuel set down his spoon and lifted his eyes. "Less responsibility or less ownership?" Clara's lips curved into a thin smile. "You misunderstand. We want to help." "No," Samuel said quietly, his voice steady as stone. "You want to take." That evening, the neighbors came by the Carters from down the road. They brought a pie, their smiles stiff, their eyes darting between Samuel and his son. "I hear there's talk of changes," Mrs. Carter said gently, her tone too careful. "David mentioned you might be stepping back, Samuel. That must feel strange. Samuel's jaw clenched. He hadn't said a word, yet the gossip had already begun. David must have been planting seeds, twisting the story into one of concern rather than betrayal. "I built this house with my hands," Samuel said flatly. "I'm not stepping back. Not now. Not ever." Mrs. Carter shifted uncomfortably, offering the pie as if it could patch over the tension. Of course, of course. Just thought I'd mention. Everyone in town respects you, Samuel. Always have." But her eyes betrayed pity, the kind given to a man they thought was already losing. Later that night, Samuel retreated to his workshop again. The lantern light flickered across the walls, casting long shadows. He sat at the bench, staring at a small wooden box tucked on the shelf. Inside lay papers he hadn't touched in years. Deeds, contracts, proof of ownership secured long ago with the wisdom of a man who trusted little but foresight. His fingers hovered over it but didn't open it yet. Not tonight. The time would come, but he wanted patience to be his ally. "Grandpa?" Lily's voice pulled him back. She stood in the doorway, hugging a worn blanket around her shoulders. "You should be asleep," Samuel said softly. "I couldn't," she whispered. She stepped inside, eyes darting to the wooden box. "What's in there?" "Memories," Samuel said. "And truths. The kind that doesn't shout but never bends." She frowned. "They talk about you like you're already gone. Like you don't matter. But you do, Grandpa. To me, you do." Samuel's throat tightened. He reached for her hand. "And that's enough to keep me standing." The next Sunday, Clara insisted on hosting a dinner with extended relatives. The long oak table stretched under candlelight once again, but the air felt heavier than before. Samuel sat silently as Clara dazzled the guests, boasting about plans to modernize the farmhouse. "We're thinking of knocking down that old shed out back," she said, her laugh ringing falsely. "It's just a pile of rotting wood. Imagine a guest house there, instead something elegant, something new." Samuel's fork froze halfway to his mouth. The shed wasn't rotting wood. It was his sanctuary, his last refuge. One uncle laughed. "Sounds marvelous, Clara. This place could use some fresh air." Ethan, smirking, added, "Yeah, Grandpa doesn't even use it. It's just junk." Samuel set his fork down slowly. The clinking of cutlery around the table dimmed, conversations faltering as they sensed the weight in his silence. "This house," Samuel said, his voice low but cutting, "and every inch of this land is not junk. It carries the sweat of my brow, the calluses of my hands, and the memories of the family that once respected me. If you wish to erase that, then you erase yourselves." The table went silent. Clara's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing like a predator caught off guard. After the guests left, Clara cornered him in the hallway. Her voice was sharp, venom laced beneath her sweetness. "You embarrassed me. Again." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "I told the truth." She leaned closer, her whisper searing. "Truth doesn't matter when the papers say otherwise, and soon the papers will be ours." For the first time, Samuel allowed himself a small, cold smile. "We'll see about that." That night, when the house finally quieted, Samuel returned to his workshop. He lit the lantern, opened the wooden box, and pulled out the yellowed envelope within. Inside lay the deed to the farmhouse, drawn decades ago, secured with clauses Clara and David couldn't possibly know about. He ran his fingers across the ink, steadying himself. Patience had always been his strength. They thought he was weak, fading, powerless. But Samuel Harrington had not survived this long by surrendering. The battle was no longer just whispers and insults. It was about to be war. The first snow came early that year. White sheets blanketed Ashwood Valley, muting the fields and silencing the roads. Inside the farmhouse, however, silence had turned into strategy. Clara and David no longer bothered to hide their ambitions. At breakfast, David laid a folder on the table between them. His fingers tapped the cover in a steady rhythm. "Father, these are some documents Harris, the attorney, prepared. All very simple. It's just a transfer of oversight. Nothing drastic. You'll still live here, but the title will be under my name, purely for practical purposes." Those are. Samuel didn't touch the folder. His spoon stirred his tea slowly, deliberately. "And what happens when I sign that?" Clara leaned forward, her perfume sharp in the morning air. "Then we'll finally be able to take care of things properly. This house won't fall into ruin. You'll be free, Father. No burdens." Samuel's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "You call it freedom, I call it erasure." David's jaw tightened. "You're being stubborn. This is for your own good." Samuel pushed the folder back across the table. "If it's so good, why does it feel like theft?" That evening, the house buzzed with tension. Clara spoke loudly in the living room, her voice cutting through the air. "We can't keep waiting. He's too sharp, David. If he refuses much longer, we'll have to force his hand." Samuel paused in the hallway, his ears catching every word. But before he could move closer, he heard the faint creak of footsteps above him. Lily. She was crouched at the top of the stairs, heart pounding, listening. David's voice was low but firm. "I've already spoken to Harris about a competency hearing. If we can convince the court Father isn't capable of managing the estate, the judge will rule in our favor." Clara's laugh rang, hollow and triumphant. "Perfect. No arguments, no defiance, just paper." Lily clutched the railing, her breath trembling. She wanted to storm down, to scream that her grandfather was stronger and wiser than any of them. But she didn't. She waited, memorizing every word. Later that night, Lily slipped into Samuel's workshop. He was hunched over his bench, polishing a worn chisel, when he saw her pale face. "Grandpa," she whispered, "they're planning something. They want to take you to court. They'll say you're not capable anymore." Samuel's hands stilled. For a moment, the room was so quiet they could hear the snow tapping against the windows. He set the chisel down, exhaling slowly. "So that's their move." Her voice shook. "We can't let them do this." He reached out, pulling her close. "Lily, listen to me. They think the law is theirs to wield, but it isn't Tanger. They forget I've seen more winters than they've seen summers, and I've prepared for this day." Her eyes widened. "You have?" He nodded, a flicker of steel in his gaze. "Your grandmother and we planned for everything, even betrayal." 2 days later, the Harrington farmhouse hosted another gathering. Clara insisted on it, inviting neighbors and relatives alike, pretending it was to celebrate the season. But Samuel knew it was theater, a stage for their lies. The oak table groaned under the weight of dishes, laughter rising like smoke. Clara held court at the center, dazzling guests with her charm. David leaned in, murmuring about managing the estate and taking burdens off Father's shoulders. Samuel sat at the head, his face calm but unreadable. Every word was a dagger, but he let them talk. He let the poison spread, because sometimes silence was more powerful than any interruption. Across the table, Ethan smirked, raising his glass. To the future of this house when it's finally in capable hands. The guests chuckled awkwardly, some glancing at Samuel, others looking away. Lily's voice cut through the noise, trembling but strong. It's already in capable hands. Without Grandpa, there wouldn't be a house to toast. The room froze. Clara's fork clattered against her plate, her smile cracking. Lily, she hissed softly, don't be disrespectful. Samuel placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. She's not being disrespectful. She's speaking the truth. Something this house hasn't heard in a long time. That night, long after the guests had gone, Samuel returned to his workshop. He opened the wooden box once more, pulling out the deed. By the flickering lantern light, the ink looked almost alive. The clauses written so long ago glimmered with promised protection no one in that house remembered but him. He whispered to the empty room, his voice steady. You want war? Then you'll have it. But not with noise, with paper. The kind that cannot be undone. The farmhouse groaned in the cold wind, as if remembering every hammer strike, every nail Samuel had driven into its bones. It would not abandon him now. Snow clung to the farmhouse windows like frost-bitten lace, muffling the world outside. Inside, the Harringtons' war was no longer whispered, it was written in ink. One morning, Samuel bent to pick up the mail by the front door. Amid the usual bills and circulars, a crisp white envelope lay heavy in his hand. The seal read, Ashwood County Probate Court. He didn't need to open it to know what it was. He carried it to the kitchen, placing it on the table between his son and daughter-in-law as they sipped coffee. Neither of them looked surprised. So it begins, Samuel said, his voice flat. Clara set her mug down delicately. Don't be dramatic, Father. It's just a formality. The court will simply review whether you're fit to manage the estate. Samuel met her gaze evenly. Fit? After 60 years of running this land, raising a family, building this house now, I need a judge to decide if I'm fit? David cleared his throat, pretending patience. It's not personal. It's just practical. You've had lapses. Forgetfulness. Lapses? Samuel's tone sharpened. I remember every nail I hammered into this wood, every dollar that kept you clothed and fed. My memory is fine. What you mistake for silence is patience. What you call weakness is restraint. Word of the hearing spread quickly through Ashwood Valley. The Harrington name, once spoken with respect, now passed between neighbors in hushed tones. At the general store, Samuel heard them. Shame, really, one man murmured. David says his father can't manage anymore. House falling apart, bills unpaid. Samuel stood in the next aisle, his fists tightening around a sack of flour. Lies, carefully placed, deliberately spread. When the storekeeper caught his eye, his smile was awkward, pitying. If you need anything, Samuel, you just ask. Folks are worried about you. Samuel forced a nod, though inside the words burned. Worried, no, convinced. David and Clara were painting him as an old man slipping into irrelevance, and people were beginning to believe it. That evening, in the quiet of the workshop, Samuel unfolded the deed again. He traced the clauses Margaret had insisted on when they first met with the lawyer decades ago. If the property is ever contested, he read the words slowly, letting them anchor him. The foresight of youth now stood as his shield in old age. Margaret had been wise. Together, they had safeguarded the home not just with bricks and wood, but with law. You thought of everything, Samuel whispered into the silence. And they think I'm defenseless. Lily entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. She set one beside him, her eyes searching his face. They're going to tell the whole town you're losing your mind, she said softly. They already have. Samuel sipped the cocoa, the warmth spreading through him. Let them. Lies spread fast, but truth has a weight that cannot be shaken. Her lip trembled. I don't want them to hurt you. He reached across the table, taking her hand. They can't hurt me, Lily. Not as long as I remember who I am, and not as long as you do. The day of the first court meeting arrived. The Harrington farmhouse seemed to groan in protest as Samuel stepped into his coat. He paused at the door, running a hand over the grain of the oak table, the wood he had carved himself so many years ago. This table has seen every fight, every meal, every reconciliation, he murmured. It will see this one too. At the courthouse, Clara was radiant in a polished coat, her smile sharp as glass. David stood beside her, nodding to neighbors who had come to watch. To them, it was a performance, the dutiful son, the concerned wife, stepping in to rescue a failing patriarch. Samuel walked slowly into the chamber, cane tapping against the floor. His back was straight, his eyes clear. He wasn't the image of a frail old man they hoped to present. He was iron wrapped in weathered skin. The judge looked over the papers, his brow furrowing. Mr. Harrington, your children claim you are no longer competent to manage your estate. Do you understand these proceedings? Samuel's voice was steady. I understand perfectly. What I do not understand is how greed dresses itself in the clothes of concern. Murmurs rippled through the room. Clara's smile faltered. If only for a heartbeat. The judge tapped his pen. We'll review all evidence. This is only the beginning. Samuel sat, folding his hands calmly in his lap. He had not come to fight with shouts. He had come armed with patience, truth, and the papers that would speak louder than any lie. That night, back in the farmhouse, Clara hissed at him across the hallway. You humiliated us, in front of everyone. Samuel met her eyes, unflinching. No, Clara, I reminded them. There's a difference. Her face twisted with fury. This isn't over. Samuel's voice was a quiet blade. You're right. It's just begun. The winter deepened. Snow piled high against the Harrington farmhouse. Inside, the air grew heavier with each day. Clara and David no longer bothered to conceal their contempt. Their voices echoed down the halls like blades sharpened against stone. One evening, Samuel overheard them in the parlor. He's slipping, Clara whispered. Did you see him fumble with his coat button in court? We can use that. David's voice was low, calculating. We'll gather testimonies. Neighbors, relatives, anyone who's seen him forget. Harris says the judge will want consistency. The more people we have, the stronger our case. Clara laughed softly, a sound that made Samuel's blood run cold. And when it's over, the house will finally be ours. Think of it, David. No more creaking furniture, no more clutter. We'll make this place shine. Samuel stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, fists clenched. They weren't just after the house. They were after the memory of everything he and Margaret had built, erasing it, piece by piece. Days later, Samuel walked into the Ashwood General Store. Conversations fell silent. He felt the eyes on him, pity, skepticism, doubt. Samuel, Mrs. Carter said carefully, we heard you've been having some difficulties. David told us you sometimes forget to lock the barn. Dangerous in this weather. Samuel's jaw tightened. The barn was locked. Always has been. But her eyes betrayed disbelief. Already, Clara and David's lies had spread like wildfire. Even old friends turned their faces away. On his walk back, the snow crunching beneath his boots, Samuel muttered to himself, "So, they're poisoning the well. Let them. Paper will cleanse what gossip cannot." That night, Samuel called an old friend, Lawrence Whitfield, the lawyer who had once drawn up the original deed. His voice crackled through the phone line, older now, but steady. "I wondered when you'd call," Lawrence said. "I kept every document we signed back then, including the clauses Margaret insisted on." Samuel exhaled slowly, relief threading through his chest. "They're trying to erase me, Lawrence. But I still have the papers." Lawrence chuckled softly. "Paper doesn't shout, Samuel, but when it speaks, it leaves scars. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready since the moment my grandson told me I wasn't family," Samuel said. His voice hardened. "They wanted war. I'll give them one." Meanwhile, Lily's loyalty only deepened. One snowy afternoon, she found Samuel in his workshop, tracing the grain of the oak table he'd once built. "They're planning something bigger," she whispered. "I overheard Mom talking with Uncle Rob. They want to push harder in court. She even mentioned power of attorney. They think, if they prove you're unfit, they can take everything." Samuel looked at her, eyes sharp despite his years. "And what do you think, Lily?" Her voice trembled, but her words were strong. "I think they've forgotten who they're dealing with." A smile tugged at Samuel's lips. "Then you see clearer than they do." That Sunday, Clara insisted on another family dinner, inviting neighbors once again. The oak table gleamed under candlelight, dishes steaming. But the warmth was false, a performance staged for the onlookers. Halfway through the meal, Clara tapped her glass, drawing attention. "David and I have been thinking," she announced sweetly. "Managing this house is too much for Father now. The bills, the upkeep, it's unfair for him. We're ready to take responsibility to ensure this place thrives." Murmurs of approval circled the table. Guests nodded politely, glancing at Samuel with rehearsed sympathy. Samuel set down his fork. His voice cut through the chatter, low but firm. "And by responsibility, you mean ownership." Clara's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Ownership, management, what's the difference?" Samuel's eyes locked on hers. "The difference is legacy, and you've mistaken greed for love." The table went silent. Forks froze. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Ethan muttered under his breath, smirking. "Legacy? You can't even keep up with the times, Grandpa. Maybe it's time you let go." Samuel's gaze pinned him. "You'll learn one day, boy, that the past you mock is the foundation you stand on." Later that night, Clara stormed into Samuel's room, her face flushed with fury. "You humiliated us again," she hissed, "in front of everyone. Do you think that makes you look strong? It makes you look petty, desperate." "Yes." Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression calm. "Truth isn't petty, and it doesn't need decoration to stand." Her eyes narrowed. "You think your scraps of paper will save you? Judges can be persuaded. Neighbors can be swayed. You're outnumbered." Samuel's voice was steady as stone. "Outnumbered doesn't mean defeated. It only means patient." Clara's lips curled in frustration, but she didn't answer. She turned sharply and stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots against the wooden floor. Alone again, Samuel returned to his workshop. He lit the lantern, pulled the deed from the envelope, and laid it flat on the bench. The ink shimmered in the light, every word a weapon. "Not yet," he whispered to the paper, "but soon." The farmhouse creaked in the silence, as if answering him. The walls remembered, the floors remembered, and Samuel Harrington, forgotten by his children, dismissed by his grandson, remembered too. And memory, he knew, was stronger than any lie. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and paper-polished wood benches, stacks of files, the low murmur of people waiting. Ashwood Valley hadn't seen a family dispute this public in years, and curiosity had brought neighbors, distant relatives, even idle strangers into the gallery. Clara and David entered like royalty, her pearl earrings swinging, his suit freshly pressed. They smiled too widely, shook hands with acquaintances, whispered little explanations about how sad it was to be in this position, but how necessary it was for father's well-being. Samuel arrived last. He wore his oldest coat, threadbare at the cuffs, but straight on his shoulders. His cane tapped steady against the polished floor as he walked. He wasn't fast, but every step carried a gravity that turned heads. Lily trailed close behind him, clutching his briefcase as though it were her own lifeline. The judge entered, papers shuffled. The bailiff called the case, In re, the estate of Samuel Harrington. Clara's lawyer, Harris, rose smoothly. Your Honor, this is a simple matter. Mr. Harrington is a beloved patriarch, but he is no longer capable of handling the complexities of his estate. We present evidence of lapses, unpaid bills, forgotten tasks, declining judgment. For his safety and the preservation of his family's legacy, we ask that management be transferred to his son, David. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Harris smiled as if the case were already won. Then Clara stood, her voice syrup-sweet. We only want what's best for him, Your Honor. He's been struggling. We've seen him confused, forgetting names, losing track of time. We love him dearly, but love must also protect. David nodded solemnly, playing the role of dutiful son. We're not trying to take anything away. We just want to shoulder the burden. Samuel rose slowly, his cane steadying him. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried across the chamber. Your Honor, 60 years ago I built the home they now live in. Every brick, every beam, every nail bears the weight of my work. If there are unpaid bills, it's because they stopped bringing me the mail. If there are lapses, they are lapses of trust, not memory. And if there is any burden, it is one I carried long before they were old enough to lift a finger. Clara's smile twitched. Harris quickly interjected. With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, this isn't about your past. It's about your present. We have witnesses. The first was a neighbor, Mr. Collins. He cleared his throat nervously. Well, I've noticed Samuel wandering outside late at night sometimes. Seems confused. Samuel leaned on his cane, eyes piercing. I've walked my land every night for 40 years, Mr. Collins. The difference now is that you choose to notice. Laughter flickered in the gallery before the judge silenced it with his gavel. Next came Mrs. Carter from the store. David told us Samuel often forgets to lock the barn. It worried us. Samuel's voice cut in before Harris could speak. The barn has been locked every night. You never saw it open. You heard a story and believed it. The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. Finally, Harris called Ethan. The boy swaggered forward, shoulders squared, voice too loud. Grandpa doesn't belong in that house anymore. He's always in the way. He forgets things, repeats himself. Honestly, Your Honor, he's not family anymore. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Lily's hand flew to her mouth. Samuel did not flinch. His voice was calm, measured. There it is, not family. Spoken by the child I once carried on my shoulders. Betrayal doesn't always come in storms, Your Honor. Sometimes it comes in a single sentence. The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst could have been. At recess, Clara cornered Samuel in the hallway, her smile sharpened to a knife's edge. "You can't keep this up," she hissed. "Every stumble, every cough, every hesitation makes you look weaker. The judge will see it. You're finished." Samuel leaned close, his voice so soft only she could hear. "You mistake silence for surrender, Clara. But paper doesn't tremble, and when it speaks, it will not be on your side." For the first time, Clara's confident mask cracked. That night, back in the farmhouse, Samuel spread the deed across the oak table. Lily sat beside him, eyes wide as he traced the hidden clauses with a steady hand. "Grandpa," she whispered, "this changes everything." Samuel nodded. "Yes, they think they're playing chess, moving pawns and rooks. But they've forgotten one thing." "What's that?" Lily asked. "The king is still on the board." Ashwood Valley woke under a gray sky, the kind that pressed low and heavy over the fields. The courthouse drama had spilled beyond its walls. Neighbors whispered in bakeries, farmers debated at feed stores, and church pews buzzed with speculation. Clara pretended calm, striding through town with her chin lifted. But behind her smile, cracks had begun to show. She knew the damage Samuel had done with his simple, unshakable words. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shouted, and yet people were starting to doubt her story. That evening, David slammed the door of the farmhouse office. "Do you realize what you've done?" he hissed. Clara turned sharply. "What I've done? He's the one who made us look like vultures in front of half the county." David raked a hand through his hair. "We're losing control of the narrative. You heard the murmurs after Ethan's outburst. They pity him now, not us." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Then we make them pity us harder. If the court of public opinion sways, the judge will lean with it. We need more witnesses, more proof, anything." Meanwhile, Samuel sat in his workshop with Lily, the deed spread out like a shield across the table. "Do you see this?" he said, pointing to the handwritten clause Margaret had insisted upon. "If any heir attempts to seize this property through deceit or coercion, their claim is void." Lily's eyes widened. "So, if Dad and Mom are proven to be lying," Samuel nodded, "they lose everything. Not just the house, their inheritance, their standing. All of it." Lily leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Then why don't you just show this now? It would end everything." Samuel's hand trembled slightly as he folded the paper back into its envelope. "Because timing matters. A blade drawn too soon is no weapon at all. Let them show the depth of their greed first. Let them overreach." Clara, however, was already overreaching. The next morning, Lily slipped into the parlor unnoticed and overheard her mother on the phone. Clara's voice was sharp, desperate. "No, it has to look official. A medical note. Something the judge can't ignore. Yes, I'll pay whatever it takes. Just make it convincing." Lily froze, her stomach turning. A forged doctor's note proof of her grandfather's supposed incompetence. She ran straight to Samuel, breathless. "Grandpa, she's going to fake documents. She'll do anything." Samuel listened quietly, his face unreadable. Then he reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" Lily asked. "To see Lawrence." If she wants to fight with forged paper, then we'll answer with real paper, the kind that leaves no cracks. The lawyer's office smelled of dust and leather. Lawrence Whitfield adjusted his spectacles as Samuel laid out what Lily had overheard. "She's desperate," Samuel said, "and desperation makes people careless." Lawrence leaned back in his chair. "Then we wait. If she produces a false note, it will be torn apart under scrutiny. And when it collapses, her credibility collapses with it." Samuel's eyes darkened. "I don't want to just defend Lawrence. I want them to remember who they tried to erase." Lawrence studied him carefully. "You've always been a builder, Samuel. Build your case the same way you built your home, piece by piece, strong enough to outlast storms." At the next family gathering, Clara was radiant again, her smile stretched thin as glass. Neighbors filled the oak table, drawn by curiosity more than affection. Clara stood, raising her glass. "We're doing everything to ensure Father's comfort. We've even consulted physicians about his condition. Soon we'll have official confirmation." A murmur of approval ran through the room. Samuel sat at the head of the table, silent, watching. Then he spoke, his voice calm but sharp. "Official papers can say many things, but the truth doesn't hide in ink. It shows itself in actions." Clara's eyes flashed with fury, but she said nothing. Around the table, glances shifted uneasily. Seeds of doubt had been planted. Later that night, Samuel found Lily in the garden, her breath fogging in the cold air. She hugged her coat tighter. "They'll never stop, Grandpa," she whispered. "It's like poison. Every day it spreads." Samuel placed a hand on her shoulder. "Poison destroys quickly, but oak endures. And this house, this family, was built on oak." His gaze lifted to the farmhouse windows glowing against the dark. His voice lowered, almost to himself. "They think I'm finished, but the truth is patient, and when it comes, it will break them." The courthouse was fuller than ever. Word had spread that today, Clara and David would present their decisive evidence. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, farmers in worn coats, shopkeepers clutching their ledgers, even the pastor from St. Matthew's Parish, all squeezed into the benches to witness what had become Ashwood Valley's greatest drama in years. Samuel walked slowly to his seat, his cane clicking against the floor. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with the quiet fire of a man who knew his worth. Beside him, Lily carried the leather envelope like sacred scripture. Across the aisle, Clara beamed, draped in pearls, David at her side with his polished smile. Ethan lounged 2 rows back, smirking, as if this was all a sport to him. The judge entered. "We reconvene in the matter of Harrington Estate. Counsel, proceed." Harris, Clara's lawyer, rose with a flourish. "Your Honor, we now bring forward irrefutable proof of Mr. Harrington's declining capacity. Medical documentation, signed by Dr. Robert Kingsley, attesting to confusion, memory lapses, and inability to manage personal affairs." Gasps echoed through the room as Harris placed the thick sheaf of papers on the bench. Clara's chin lifted triumphantly. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the first page. "This is serious evidence." Samuel remained still, his hands folded over his cane. Lawrence Whitfield, Samuel's lawyer, stood slowly. "Your Honor, may I examine the documents?" Harris hesitated, then nodded, confident. Lawrence leafed through the pages, his expression unreadable. At last, he turned, holding up one sheet. "Dr. Kingsley, you say?" Lawrence's voice was mild, but his eyes gleamed. "Curious, because Dr. Kingsley retired 3 years ago. He hasn't practiced medicine in Ashwood Valley since." A ripple of shock coursed through the gallery. Clara's smile faltered. Lawrence pressed on. Even more curious, this letterhead. It bears the address of the old Ashwood Clinic. That building was demolished last spring. Yet here it is, printed as though nothing had changed. The judge leaned forward, frowning. Mr. Harris, are you certain of your source? Harris stammered, flipping through his notes. Clara's face flushed crimson, her eyes darting to David. Samuel finally rose. His voice, steady and quiet, filled the chamber. Your Honor, lies are like rotten wood. They may look solid at first glance, but lean too hard, and they collapse. My children mistake their schemes for strength, but strength built on deceit cannot last. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court! The gallery erupted, whispers, gasps, muttered accusations. Neighbors who once nodded politely at Clara now turned away, their faces tight with judgment. During recess, Clara cornered Samuel near the courthouse steps. The cold wind whipped her hair across her furious face. You think you've won because of one slip? She hissed. This isn't over. I'll find another way. Samuel's eyes met hers, unflinching. You already lost, Clara. Not in court, in your heart. The moment you turned family into an enemy, you lost everything worth keeping. Her hand trembled at her side. For the first time, her voice broke. You were supposed to fade quietly. Samuel's reply was soft, but sharp as a blade. Oak does not fade. It endures. That evening, back at the farmhouse, the atmosphere was electric. David paced the parlor, furious. You were careless, Clara. Sloppy. Now they all see us as liars. Clara spun on him, eyes blazing. Don't you dare put this on me. You were supposed to secure the doctor's cooperation. Instead, we look like fools. From the doorway, Ethan smirked, tossing an apple in his hand. Relax. Grandpa's old. He can't hold on forever. Sooner or later, time will do our work for us. Samuel, listening unseen from the hallway, clenched his jaw. For years, he had believed time was his enemy. But now he saw it clearly. Time was their enemy. Every lie, every scheme was unraveling faster than they could weave. Later that night, Samuel sat with Lily at the oak table. He laid out the envelope once more. They think today was my only defense, he said quietly. But that was only the beginning. When the time is right, Lily, this paper will remind them and the world whose name built this house. Lily's eyes shone with tears. Promise me, Grandpa. Promise me you won't let them break you. Samuel placed his hand over hers, the lines of his skin tracing hers. They can't break what they didn't build. The farmhouse that once smelled of bread and cedar now carried only tension. The laughter of Sunday dinners was gone, replaced by whispered arguments and slammed doors. Clara stared out the window late into the night, the lamplight carving hard shadows across her face. The town had turned colder since the failed medical stunt. Neighbors who once smiled now crossed the street. At the market, women whispered. At church, pews shifted away from her. David stormed into the room, his tie loosened, his jaw tight. We can't keep bleeding like this. Every move we make blows up in our faces. Clara turned sharply. Then we stop playing defense. If truth won't bend, then fear will. David frowned. Fear? Her lips curved into a bitter smile. The old man is stubborn, but everyone has pressure points. We just need to squeeze. The next evening, Ethan swaggered into Samuel's study without knocking. He tossed his backpack onto the chair, slumping like he owned the place. "You should make this easier, Grandpa," he said, his voice sharp with practiced cruelty. "Dad says you're just being selfish. You've got more house than you can even use. What's the point of holding on?" Samuel looked up from the ledger in his hands. His gaze was steady, unblinking. "Tell me, Ethan, what have you built with your own hands?" The boy hesitated, then sneered. "That's not the point." "It is," Samuel replied softly. "Until you've built something yourself, you'll never understand why it matters. You can't claim what you haven't earned." Ethan's smirk faltered. He grabbed his backpack and stormed out, muttering, "You won't be around forever." From the hallway, Clara's eyes glinted, having listened to every word. Meanwhile, Samuel met with Lawrence again in the lawyer's oak-paneled office. He laid the deed on the desk. "It's time," Samuel said. "They've shown their hand. Lies, forgeries, intimidation. Every plank of their bridge is rotten." Lawrence studied the document, fingers running over the faded ink. "You realize what this means. Revealing this clause doesn't just protect you, it erases them. David, Clara, they'll inherit nothing." Samuel's jaw tightened. "They erased me first. In front of my neighbors, my family, even their own children. They said I wasn't family. Now the truth will remind them what family really means." Lawrence sighed, but nodded. "Very well. We'll prepare the filing. When the time comes, the court won't just see your strength. They'll see their betrayal written in their own actions." Clara, desperate to regain footing, sought out an old acquaintance, Rob Mason, a slick businessman known for bending rules until they broke. They met in a quiet corner of the tavern, away from prying eyes. "You need leverage," Rob said, sipping his drink. "Something that hurts him more than the law. Force his hand." Clara leaned in, her voice low. "And what would that cost me?" Rob's smile was cold. "Less than losing everything." "Think carefully, Clara. If the judge throws out your case, your father will cut you out completely. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" Clara's hands trembled around her glass, but her voice was steady. "Number. I'll do whatever it takes." That night, Lily found her grandfather in the shed, oiling the tools he hadn't used in years. The lantern light flickered over his face, carving deep lines of determination. "They're planning something worse," she whispered. "I can feel it." Samuel set the cloth down, his voice calm. "Let them plan. Let them dig the pit deeper. The deeper it goes, the harder the fall." Lily's throat tightened. "But what if they hurt you first?" He turned, resting a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Child, I've faced storms, wars, and winters harsher than this. They cannot hurt me. They can only hurt themselves." The tension came to a head days later at the dinner table. Clara raised her glass, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We've made arrangements," she announced. "Father won't be burdened much longer. The house will have new management, proper management." Gasps rippled through the guests. Ethan smirked. David nodded smugly. Samuel's hand rested lightly on the envelope in his pocket. His eyes swept the room, every face watching, waiting. "Then let them come," he murmured, just loud enough for Lily to hear. For the first time in weeks, she saw him smile. The courthouse bell tolled heavy in the morning air, echoing across Ashwood Valley like a warning. People crowded the steps, murmuring with anticipation. Some carried folded newspapers, their headlines bold. Harrington trial resumes, family rift deepens. Inside, the tension crackled. Samuel sat silently at the defense table, Lily at his side, her hands clenched around his arm. Across from them, Clara radiated cold triumph, David whispering into her ear like a snake coiled around its prey. The judge entered, and the room hushed. "Counsel, proceed," he said. Harris, Clara's lawyer, rose with renewed vigor. "Your Honor, the defense has painted my clients as opportunists, but the truth is simpler. Mr. Harrington is unfit. Today, we present testimony to prove it. His own grandson will attest to his incompetence." The bailiff called Ethan forward. The boy swaggered up, his grin careless, his chin tilted high. He placed a hand on the Bible and swore in. Harris paced before him. "Ethan, tell the court about your grandfather." Ethan smirked. "He forgets things. He repeats stories. Sometimes he just zones out. He's not the same man he used to be." Whispers rippled through the gallery. Clara's lips curled upward. Harris leaned closer. "Would you say he's capable of managing this property alone?" Ethan shrugged. "Honestly, he's old. He can barely make it up the stairs." Clara shot a triumphant glance at Samuel. Lawrence rose, his voice cool. "Ethan, how old are you?" 17, Ethan replied, frowning. 17, Lawrence repeated. "And in those 17 years, how many mortgages have you signed? How many deeds have you managed? How many bills have you paid?" Ethan faltered. "Well, none." Lawrence's eyes sharpened. "So, a boy with no experience in property or finance is declaring a man who built this estate with his bare hands incapable of managing it. Tell me, Ethan, when you call your grandfather forgetful, is it because he forgets your lies or because you forget his sacrifices?" The gallery stirred. Ethan's face reddened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Objection!" Harris barked. "Overruled," the judge said firmly. "Proceed." Lawrence returned to the defense table, lifting the worn leather envelope. His voice carried like thunder in the silence. "Your Honor, my client has been accused of incompetence. He has been slandered, humiliated, and even erased from his family's own history. But the truth lies not in words, it lies in this document." He placed the deed on the bench. The courtroom leaned forward. "This deed, signed decades ago, contains a clause written in his late wife's hand. It states that any heir who seeks to seize this property through deceit or coercion shall forfeit their claim. By their own actions, Clara and David have voided their rights." The judge's eyes widened as he read. Murmurs exploded through the gallery. Clara shot to her feet. "This is outrageous! He's manipulating the court with old paper." Lawrence's voice cut through her protest. "Old paper, yes. The kind that outlives lies. The kind that binds truth tighter than any tongue." Samuel rose at last, his voice steady, unshaken. "You wanted to erase me," he said, his gaze sweeping over Clara, David, Ethan. "You wanted the walls without the hands that built them, the table without the man who carved it, the name without the blood that carried it. But family cannot be erased by greed. It endures, just as this house endures." The judge banged his gavel. "Order!" But the gallery was already in uproar, neighbors whispering, friends shaking their heads in disbelief. For the first time, Clara's carefully crafted mask cracked. David's face drained of color. And Ethan, who had once spat, "You're not family," sat frozen, the weight of his own words crashing down upon him. During recess, Clara cornered Samuel in the hallway, her hands trembling. You think this piece of paper will save you? She hissed. You think the town will forget what I've told them? Samuel's eyes locked onto hers, calm but unyielding. They won't forget, Clara. They'll remember, not your lies but the truth. And one day, so will you. She stumbled back as if struck, her mouth opening but no words escaping. That evening, Samuel and Lily returned to the farmhouse. The lamps glowed softly, chasing shadows from the walls. For the first time in months, the house felt lighter, as if it too had heard the truth spoken aloud. Lily turned to her grandfather, her voice trembling. You did it. You really did it. Samuel sank into the armchair, his hand tracing the grooves of the oak table. No, child, he said softly. I haven't finished yet. Today was only the turning of the tide. The storm is still coming, and when it does, they'll face the reckoning they've earned. The courthouse doors slammed shut behind Clara with a force that startled the bystanders lingering on the steps. She strode down the stone path like a queen dispossessed, David trailing behind, muttering warnings. Her cheeks burned crimson, her jaw clenched tight. They think a piece of paper erases me? She hissed under her breath. They think he wins? David reached for her arm. Clara, listen to me. We've lost too much ground. The clause is airtight. The judge. She spun on him, eyes blazing. Then we don't fight with paper anymore. We fight with fire. David froze. What do you mean? Her voice dropped, low and venomous. If I can't have the house, then no one will. Not even him. That night, the farmhouse glowed warm against the valley's dark hills. Inside, Samuel sat with Lily by the fire. The crackle of the wood was comforting, but his face remained somber. They'll try something desperate now, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the flames. Lily looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. Do you think they'd hurt you? Samuel shook his head. Not me. The house. They think this place is my heart. And they're right, but not in the way they believe. If they destroy the walls, they still won't touch the roots. She squeezed his hand, whispering, I'm scared, Grandpa. His fingers closed gently over hers. So am I. But fear is only the shadow of love, and shadows vanish when light comes. Meanwhile, Clara sat at her polished dining table, the room cold despite the fire in the hearth. Ethan slouched opposite her, scrolling his phone, his face pale with unease. Mom, he muttered, people at school won't stop talking. They're saying we forged papers that Grandpa humiliated us in court. It's... Enough! Clara snapped, slamming her fist against the table. Ethan jumped, his phone clattering. I don't care what they say. They'll see soon enough. They'll see I am not the woman to be erased. David leaned against the wall, weary. Clara, stop. The more you fight, the deeper you sink. You'll drown us all. She glared at him, her voice cutting like glass. Then drown with me, or get out of my way. Days later, the Harrington estate hosted what was once tradition, Sunday dinner. But this gathering was no celebration. The tension was suffocating. Neighbors came reluctantly, drawn more by curiosity than loyalty. The oak table groaned under the weight of food, but no one laughed, no one toasted. Samuel entered last, leaning on his cane. The room fell into uneasy silence. Clara raised her glass immediately, her smile brittle. To family, she declared, her voice too bright, too sharp, though some among us seem to have forgotten what family means. Murmurs rippled. Samuel lowered himself into the chair at the head of the table, his rightful place. His silence carried more weight than her toast. Clara's hand trembled around her glass. She slammed it down, wine splashing across the linen. "You think this house makes you strong?" she spat. "You think your dusty papers and your quiet speeches make you untouchable?" Gasps echoed through the room. Ethan sank lower in his chair. David pressed a hand to his forehead. Samuel's voice was calm, but unyielding. "Strength doesn't come from paper, Clara. It comes from truth. That's why you fear it so." Her breath came fast, shallow. "Number strength comes from fire." And with that, she stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor, and stormed from the room. The guests left quickly, whispers following Clara's retreat. Ethan slunk upstairs without a word. David lingered at the doorway, his face pale, defeated. Samuel sat quietly at the table long after the dishes were cleared. Lily touched his shoulder. What did she mean by fire? His gaze lingered on the flickering candles, his voice heavy. "She means destruction, child. And when a heart turns to fire, it burns not just its enemies, but itself." That night, Samuel stood at the window of his bedroom, watching the valley sleep. The house creaked softly around him, as though it, too, held its breath. He whispered to the dark, "They tried to erase me. Now they may try to erase the home itself. But oak remembers. Stone remembers. And the truth will outlast even fire." The night fell heavy over Ashwood Valley, a suffocating blanket of clouds smothering the stars. The Harrington farmhouse stood proud but weary, its walls echoing with decades of laughter, loss, and sacrifice. Tonight, though, it held its breath, sensing what was coming. Clara sat in her car at the end of the gravel drive, her fingers white-knuckled around the steering wheel. The papers, the whispers, the courtroom shame, all of it swirled in her head like a storm that would not break. Her reflection in the rear-view mirror was unrecognizable, eyes wild, cheeks streaked with tears, mouth twisted with fury. "This house ruined me," she whispered hoarsely. "If I can't have it, no one will." She reached into the passenger seat. The small red canister of gasoline glinted under the moonlight. Inside the house, Samuel sat in his armchair, reading the letter his late wife had written years ago, the one she tucked alongside the deed. Her words were tender but firm, speaking of family as something sacred, something to be nurtured, not hoarded. His lips trembled as he read the final line aloud. "Protect what we built, Samuel. Protect it with truth, not with anger. For anger consumes, but truth endures." A sudden creak outside made him pause. He rose slowly, cane in hand, and moved to the window. A figure darted across the yard, shadows stretching long against the barn. His heart tightened. He knew that silhouette. "Clara," he whispered. Lily was the first to smell the sharp sting of gasoline. She rushed downstairs, panic etched across her face. "Grandpa," she cried. "Something's wrong." They opened the front door together just in time to see Clara uncapping the canister, pouring liquid across the porch steps, her face lit by the wavering flame of a lighter in her other hand. "Mother, stop!" Ethan's voice cracked as he came running down the drive, his school jacket half-zipped, eyes wide with fear. Clara spun, her voice ragged. "Stay back! This is the only way. If he won't give us the house, then it dies with him." Neighbors, drawn by the shouting, began to gather along the fence line. Murmurs rose, horrified, as the scene unfolded. Samuel stepped onto the porch, the scent of gasoline stinging his throat. He lifted a trembling hand, not in anger but in plea. "Clara, put it down." Her grip on the lighter tightened. "Don't you dare tell me what to do. You stole everything from me. My life, my reputation, my family's respect. No, Samuel interrupted, his voice steady but low. You gave those away when you let greed take their place. Clara's eyes darted, wild and wet. You don't understand. I was supposed to be more than this. I was supposed to win. Samuel took one careful step forward. And what will you win, Clara? Ashes? The sound of your son's scream when he watches his mother burn what she once begged for. That's not victory. That's ruin. Ethan's voice cracked, tears streaming down his face. Mom, please, stop. I didn't mean it when I said he wasn't family. I was stupid. I was wrong. The words struck the crowd like a stone shattering glass. The very sentence that had started Samuel's erasure now rang out in repentance. Clara's hand trembled violently. The flame wavered. Then Lily stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. Aunt Clara, family doesn't burn family. Even when they betray, even when they wound us, family remembers. Grandpa never erased you. You erased yourself. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. Clara's knees buckled. She dropped the canister, the lighter clattering harmlessly to the gravel. Her sobs tore through the night as she collapsed to the ground. Ethan rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her, weeping. The neighbors watched in stunned silence. Some shook their heads, others whispered prayers. Samuel stood still on the porch, his figure framed by the lantern light. His face was grave, but not cruel. Fire only consumes, he said quietly, his words carrying to every ear present. But tonight, it did not consume us. Tonight, truth stood taller. Later, as the crowd dispersed and Clara was led inside by David and Ethan, Samuel sat once more at the oak table. Lily placed a cup of tea before him, her hands still trembling. "Do you think she'll ever forgive herself?" she asked softly. Samuel stared at the flame of the candle between them. "Forgiveness is a road, child. Some walk it, some never find it. But tonight, she took her first step. Morning broke over Ashwood Valley with pale, uneasy light. The farmhouse porch still bore the dark stains of gasoline, though no fire had touched it. Neighbors passed by in hushed tones, their glances lingering on the house, their whispers carrying judgment and pity in equal measure. Inside, Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her once perfect hair hung limp, her eyes swollen from hours of tears. David hovered near the doorway, silent, his face drawn and hollow. Ethan sat beside her, shoulders slumped, staring at the wood grain as if it held the answers he had been too blind to see. Samuel entered quietly, his cane tapping against the floor. He looked at Clara, the woman who had nearly destroyed everything, and then at Ethan, the boy whose cruel words had cut deepest. His gaze was stern, but not without sorrow. "No court could pass a harsher sentence than the one you carry in your own hearts," he said at last. Clara's lips quivered. I don't know how to undo it." "You can't," Samuel replied. "What's done is done, but you can choose what you do next." That afternoon, the family returned to the courthouse for the final hearing. Word of Clara's desperate act had already spread, and the gallery was filled to bursting. Farmers, merchants, and townsfolk crowded the benches, waiting to hear how the legacy of Ashwood Valley's most storied family would end. The judge's gavel called for order. "We reconvene for final deliberations. Counsel, proceed." Lawrence rose, calm as ever. "Your Honor, in light of recent events, I need not belabor my point. The deed, the clause, the testimony all prove that my client, Samuel Harrington, remains the rightful owner of his estate. But beyond legality lies something greater: intent. Mr. Harrington's intent has never wavered. He built this house not for greed, but for family, for memory, for legacy. That truth cannot be erased, not by lies, nor by fire. The gallery stirred, heads nodding in agreement. Harris, Clara's lawyer, attempted to stand, but Clara touched his sleeve. Her voice was hoarse. "Sit down. It's over." The judge nodded gravely. "I have reviewed the deed and the clause. The law is clear. Samuel Harrington retains full ownership of his estate. Furthermore, given the attempted arson and evidence of coercion, I recommend additional proceedings should the plaintiff wish to pursue damages." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Samuel lifted a hand, his voice steady but surprising. "No, Your Honor. I seek no punishment, only peace." The judge regarded him for a long moment before striking the gavel. So ordered. As the crowd filed out, Clara remained seated, her face pale, her shoulders bowed. Samuel walked past her slowly, pausing just long enough to speak softly. "You tried to burn the house, Clara. But it was never the house you were destroying. It was yourself. Remember that." Her breath caught, but she did not reply. Ethan helped her to her feet, his face streaked with shame. That evening, back at the farmhouse, Samuel sat once more at the oak table, the deed and his late wife's letter spread before him. Lily joined him, her eyes searching his face. "It's finished now," she whispered. "Isn't it?" He gave a small, weary smile. "The battle is finished. But the wounds, they will take time to heal." She placed her hand over his. "Do you think they'll ever come back? Clara? Ethan? Uncle David?" Samuel's gaze softened, distant. "The door will always be open. Whether they walk through it is their choice. Some houses are built of stone, some of blood, and some of forgiveness." The fire crackled gently in the hearth. For the first time in months, the house seemed to exhale not in pain, but in relief. Autumn settled gently over Ashwood Valley. The fields stretched golden under the waning sun, and the farmhouse, scarred, yet unbroken, stood like an old sentinel watching over the land it had anchored for generations. Samuel sat on the porch, wrapped in his thick wool coat, his cane resting beside him. Lily sat at his feet on the wooden steps, her hands folded in her lap. The silence between them was not heavy now, but companionable, like the quiet that follows a storm when the air smells clean again. "Do you think they'll come back?" Lily asked softly, her eyes fixed on the winding road. Samuel's gaze followed hers. "One day. Perhaps not soon, but one day." "And if they don't?" He exhaled slowly. "Then the house will still stand. Not for their pride, not for my sorrow, but for the truth it carries. A house is only wood and stone until love fills it, and though greed tried to strip it bare, love still lingers in these walls. That can't be burned away." That evening, Samuel walked slowly through the farmhouse halls. Each photograph, each mark on the wall, whispered stories. Here was the notch where Matthew had measured his height as a boy. There was the window where Margaret used to sit and embroider by the morning light. The smell of oak and pine still clung faintly to the walls of his workshop. When he entered the study, he paused before the old oak table. His fingers traced its grooves, worn smooth by decades of meals, arguments, and reconciliations. Tonight, the table bore only a candle and a folded letter. Lily peeked in, curious. "What's that?" Samuel smiled faintly. A letter for tomorrow, for whoever carries the house when I'm gone. Not instructions, not conditions, just truth. She tilted her head. What did you write? That family is not inheritance. It's not deeds or walls. It's not even blood. Family is the people who choose, every day, to hold one another in love, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Weeks passed, and life in Ashwood Valley resumed its rhythm. Neighbors came again to share meals, to sit by the fire, to trade stories. The shame of Clara's actions faded into whispers, but Samuel never spoke ill of her. When asked, he only said, "Pray for her. Pray she finds her way back." One Sunday afternoon, Samuel and Lily were tending the small garden near the porch. A car pulled up the gravel drive. David stepped out first, his face weathered and uncertain. Ethan followed, taller now, shoulders heavy with humility. Clara remained seated in the car, her eyes hidden behind the glass. Lily's breath caught. "It's them." Samuel placed a steady hand on her arm. "Let them come in their time." David approached slowly, removing his hat. "Father, may we talk?" Samuel studied him a long moment, then nodded. "Come, the table is waiting." That night, the oak table once again bore the weight of a family divided, and perhaps ready to be stitched back together. No accusations were spoken, no apologies demanded. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the soft clinking of cups. Ethan finally lifted his gaze. His voice broke as he whispered, "I was wrong, Grandpa. When I said you weren't family. You are. You always were." Samuel's eyes glistened, but his voice was steady. "Words wound, boy, but they can also heal. Tonight they begin to heal." From the shadows, Clara's whisper slipped into the room. "I don't know if I can be forgiven." Samuel turned toward her. "Forgiveness is not earned, Clara. It's given. And though you burned me with betrayal, though you nearly burned this house, still you are family, and family remembers." Her face crumpled as tears slid silently down her cheeks. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Samuel returned to the porch. He gazed out at the valley, the moonlight silvering the fields. Lily curled against his side, half asleep. He whispered into the still air, as though Margaret herself could hear. "They tried to erase me, love, but I am still here, and so are they. Broken perhaps, but here. And as long as this house stands, so does our story." The wind stirred the trees gently, almost like an answer. Samuel smiled faintly, the candlelight from inside spilling across the porch. The farmhouse breathed easy again, its roots sunk deep, its walls whispering not of betrayal, but of resilience. Because truth had spoken louder than fire, and the house remembered.